Hi, my name's Kenny Bristol, and today I'm going to be talking about Chapter 36, World War II. World War II consisted of two major powers, the Axis powers and the Allied powers. The Axis powers first formed in 1936 and were composed of Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan. It was until 1941 that these powers squared off officially, but the formation started much sooner. The Allied powers were composed of the United States, Great Britain, Canada, the Soviet Union, China, France, and the United States' Latin America allies. The construction of this organization took place throughout the 1930s and into the early 1940s, when the United States and the Soviet Union were attacked and joined as a result. The Axis goal was generally to spread and conquer territories, and the Allies were provoked into joining a war. China became the first country to experience the horrors of World War II, as Japan brutally attacked many of their civilians. The rape of Nanjing was an event that took place over several months that involved Japanese bombers attacking Chinese civilians and killing thousands, along with raping and murdering thousands more. Conflict between Japan and China persisted throughout World War II. Although China was largely outnumbered, they were able to tie down half the Japanese army by 1941. However, the Chinese resistance to the Japanese struggled as internal issues between split in the country of nationalists and communists caused many issues. During the war, the nationalist feeling was strong throughout the country, as they were trying to fight off the Japanese. But by the end, communists were poised to lead China in a new direction. Benito Mussolini was the fierce leader of Italy throughout World War II. He ruled Italy from 1922 until 1943, but formed the country into a dictatorship under his idea of fascism. Mussolini promised to bring glory to Italy following the Great War by expanding the country. This, along with Mussolini's violent form of expansion, led to ultimately spreading World War II into Europe. Although Japan and Italy were the first nations to challenge the World War I post-settlements, Germany was the first to undo officially the Treaty of Versailles. Germans were unhappy following World War I, and as a result, Adolf Hitler was able to come to power in 1933. Hitler blamed the post-war issues on Jews, communists, and liberals. Hitler proceeded to ignore the Treaty of Versailles and its peaceful efforts, and proceeded to begin his campaign of expansion in 1938. Hitler's first form of expansion came in the shape of Sudetenland, which was the western portion of Czechoslovakia. He was able to take control of the Sudetenland, and neither the French nor British were willing to risk military confrontation this early. In 1938, at the Munich Conference, Italy, France, Great Britain, and Germany all met to form a sort of appeasement. The goal of this was to help keep peace throughout Europe. Hitler, however, refused to bow to the Munich Agreement, and the next year annexed most of Czechoslovakia. Following the Munich Conference, Joseph Stalin was convinced that British and French leaders were conspiring with Germany to deflect aggression towards the Soviet Union. As a result, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact in 1939, which shocked and outraged much of the world. The agreement promised that neither country would attack one another, and also promised neutrality in the event that either of the countries went to war. World War II officially began in September of 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Their strategy of blitzkrieg, or lightning war, helped the Germans become extremely successful at conquering Europe. Great Britain and France joined together to help defend Europe. However, the strength of Germany's Air Force and Navy caused many issues for the British and French. In April 1940, the Germans occupied both Denmark and Norway and then launched a full-scale attack on Western Europe. This ultimately led to the fall of France and was followed by the Battle of Britain. Hitler attempted to take over Britain by use of Air Force only, but the British were able to fight off the Germans and cause Hitler to rethink his plans. The next important event that occurred was in the spring of 1941, when Hitler, following his string of victories in Europe, decided to attack and invade the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa took place in June 1941, when the German armed forces invaded the Soviet Union. 3.6 million soldiers attacked over 3,000 kilometers of the Soviet Union and took Stalin and the rest of the Soviet Union by surprise. However, along with the Allies' help and a strong winter, the Soviet Union was able to fight off the Germans and ultimately defend their country. After touching on Europe, some will now move to the Pacific. The United States didn't become involved in World War II until 1941, when the events of Pearl Harbor occurred. The Japanese Air Force attacked the naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 11, 1941, which was a huge surprise to the United States and Britain. Following this attack and victory, the Japanese continued to plan attacks in the Pacific and were very successful. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president of the United States at the time, was forced to act, and the United States declared war as a result. World War II was in full swing at this point, as the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain were all heavily involved. Following the Soviet Union's victory over the Germans after the Germans' attack, Great Britain and the U.S. planned an attack on the front in France. This day became known as D-Day. June 6, 1944, where the U.S. and British troops landed on the French coast of Normandy. Fighting was extremely deadly for both sides. The Germans were overwhelmed, and this became a turning point in the war for the Allies. The turning point in the Pacific came while the U.S. was fighting the Japanese on the islands of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The Japanese tactics were full of savagery and involved the new strategy of kamikaze pilots, which flew planes onto Allied ships with the intent of blowing up their ships and killing U.S. soldiers. The U.S. forces battled and were ultimately able to take victory, as this famous picture here is the U.S. soldiers raising a flag on Iwo Jima. However, despite these victories, it was until 1945 that the U.S. was able to force the Japanese to surrender. They dropped 2 atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th of 1945, and this ultimately led to the surrender of the Japanese. The Soviet Union had also declared war on Japan on August 8th, and along with the bombs and this new threat, the Japanese were forced to surrender and left the country in shambles. The last thing I wanted to touch on, which took place throughout the entirety of World War II, was the Holocaust. Hitler sought out to remove all Jews from society with the attempt of only saving blonde-haired and blue-eyed Aryan people. He formed concentration camps and had the idea of killing all Jews, which became known as the final solution. Although millions of Jews in fact died, Jewish resistance along with the Allied victory in Europe helped distinguish these concentration camps and the entire Holocaust movement.